theanswer.com.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Old habits die hard. Old habits die hard, and that appears to be the case with old Joe Biden. Some critics from the left are suggesting that Biden is back to his old Neil Kinnock playbook, plagiarizing other people's work. Proposals on the environment on the Biden presidential website closely mirror those passages from environmental groups. For example, the Carbon Capture Coalition outlines a plan on their website. Our goal is to make carbon capture, use, and storage, CCUS, a widely available, cost-effective, and rapidly scalable solution to reduce carbon emissions to meet mid-century climate goals. Biden's website, Biden's goal is to make carbon capture, uses, and storage, CCUS, a widely available, cost-effective, and rapidly scalable solution.
Plagiarism!
I mean, it's verbatim.
Cut and paste. That's what you do nowadays.
This is the Washington Examiner reporting. Josh Nelson, left-wing environmentalist, first noticed the similarities, to another website, the Blue-Green Alliance, lifted a section from the Blue-Green Alliance's 2017 letter to the Senate as well.
And he also said that he marched in the civil rights movement, and he didn't. And that made the CNN panel
That's a problem.
break out. And actually, they were laughing at him.
And other things, he has tended to embellish. He has tended to, make things sound slightly rosier than they are. Now, his aides went back to say, look, he was in office marching for the idea of civil rights, but was not actually marching in the streets. But that would not fly as much. But he was supporting civil rights. But I'm saying that in today's
That's not what the word marching means.
of Twitter, okay.
Yeah.
I know, you're just telling what they said.
Right,
but
in the age of Twitter today, Instagram, there would be pictures of him not marching. So you cannot get away with that in this moment. So that's his big challenge.
That's very much like Dick Blumenthal engaged in the idea of being in combat in Vietnam.
Right.
Didn't actually go.
No, didn't go at all.
But the idea, it was in his head that he was there and fighting for America.
It's so perverse.
Okay. CBS, too. It's interesting. Some of the D.C. press corps outlets, like CNN, being none too kind to Joe Biden. This from CBS News, too, talking about Joe Biden running for the United States Senate back in 1972, the year of my birth. That's how long this guy's been bouncing around.
Oh my God, I thought you were older. I thought you were born in 62.
No.
Who am I working with?
This is him running as a 29-year-old against the Republican incumbent Cale Boggs, who was more than 30 years a senior. And the arguments that Mayor Pete and I guess Beto to some extent are making against Joe Biden now are the arguments a 29-year-old Joe Biden was making against Cale Boggs as he's trying to stave off now. There is something karmic about that, which is entertaining. But I got to tell you, I continue to restate my position. If you want Trump reelected, and if you could select the weakest Democrat candidate for him to face, it's Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. It is Joe Biden, and I don't think it's close. And you know what the tell is?
What?
Not touting anything substantive about him, the Joe Biden supporters, using the phrase electability. It's the same phrase that was used by Republicans with respect to Bob Dole in 1996. In fact, it's the same word that has been used, perhaps to the most ignominious effect by Republicans in this godforsaken state of Illinois, where the Republican Party has now ceased to exist. Electability, the way that they use it when you don't have anything else to say, is the way of saying, there is no substance. We have no idea. This is Mitt Romney is electability. That was the Mitt Romney argument in 2012. Electability. Electability is the cover for someone who doesn't represent the base of the party's values or policy positions. That was the case in 96 with Dole. It's the case in 2020 with Biden. For more on this topic and a few others, we're pleased to be joined again by Noah Rothman, Associate Editor for Commentary Magazine, MSNBC, and NBC News contributor, the author of the book Unjust: Social Justice and the Unmaking of America. Noah, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
What about Biden's campaign so far? I mean, I know that everybody, the D.C. press corps is touting the national polls, which are meaningless, showing him with a big lead. But what's your assessment of Biden's campaign thus far and his ability to go the distance?
Well, I don't know if I entirely agree with your assessment, honestly. So the plagiarism issue is a big issue. The notion that he's lifted some things from some policy websites in relation to policy is, well, it would get you bounced in a college program. I don't think that's going to register with voters. The Neil Kinnock story was about Biden lifting a story from Neil Kinnock about Neil Kinnock,
right? Which
is why it was such an egregious episode, and makes the his attachment to the notion that he was some sort of a civil rights marcher much more damaging, I think, than the policy stuff. That to me feels like just nitpicking in an effort to try to generate some controversy where I don't think it really genuinely exists.
Well, except if I could just interject there, except that because of the prior bad acts, it goes to lessons not learned, is my point. It's not that they're the same.
And it's true, and it would knock him off his game if he was forced to litigate that. So it could be a threat if he were to address it. If he simply ignores it, I think it just goes away. In relation to polls, you're absolutely right that head-to-head polls at this point don't really matter, with the exception of the fact that when it comes to the head-to-head between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, there's a really glaring gap in the battleground states, but there's a really glaring gap between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders in the battleground states that favor Bernie Sanders. The president is in real trouble if you look at the head-to-heads and you don't simply dismiss them, and they might be dismissible at this stage.
And it's unbelievable.
There's a lot to say for Biden's support among Democrats in the primary polls. He is 20 points up in national polling, and there's no national primary, but in the early states, in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada, his lead is prohibitive. If he doesn't step on a landmine in the debates, and he wins Iowa, and he wins New Hampshire, and he wins South Carolina, the fight is over. He's won the nomination, and then he pivots to the general election in February of 2020, and that's a real advantage.
Well, I mean, the first Democratic debate is this month, believe it or not. It's, later this month. But is he a great debater? Do you think he's going to score any points there?
Not really. And the thing is that he's going to have a target on his back, obviously, because he's the biggest target and he has the most to lose. However, if the debates become – there's a ton of people in these debates, right? And a lot of them are on the left, more to the left of Joe Biden in policy terms. And if these debates become an effort among these candidates to introduce themselves to voters and thereby demonstrate their progressive bona fides vis-a-vis each other, Joe Biden is not competing in that primary. Joe Biden skates. He doesn't end up becoming the subject of all these attacks. There'll be a glancing blows on him, but the target of these attacks among progressives will be among fellow progressives who will be cannibalizing their share of the vote. So if that becomes the dynamic, then Joe Biden could actually end up benefiting.
David Drucker over the Washington Examiner had a piece this week that the effort among never-Trumpers to find a primary candidate against President Trump is basically DOA. Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland's taking a pass, and the assessment is that particularly after the Mueller nothing burger of sorts, at least from Republicans' perspective, the president enjoys such high approval ratings among Republicans that it's a futile effort. Nonetheless, there is this undercurrent of dissension among the ranks, among some conservatives, most notably exemplified by this running debate between Sohrab Ahmari and David French, and those then chiming in to take one side or the other. Essentially, the argument that Ahmari makes, these are two conservative op-ed writers, both have been on the show here, the Ahmari makes of David French that his nice guy routine is the wrong disposition for the cultural war that needs to be fought. He says essentially that David French believes that the institutions of a technocratic market society are neutral zones that should, in theory, accommodate both traditional Christianity and the libertarian ways and pagan ideology of the other side. And he suggests that a full frontal assault, not David French niceties, is the approach to take. Now, these guys agree on a lot of issues in terms of the substance, but the approach, there's a real difference of opinion, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to weigh in on this debate since it's important in conservative circles.
Yeah, and I generally stayed out of it in public, in part because Sorab is my friend and former colleague at Commentary Magazine, and David French is also a friend and a colleague, although I don't know him as well. And in part because I feel like this debate is really entirely circular, and everyone is arguing with strongman versions of each other that don't actually comport with any reality. There's no reality in which David French is some sort of squish who shies away from a fight.
Right.
There is no reality in which Sohrab Ahmari is some illiberal theocrat who really genuinely has no love for American institutions. I mean, these are nonsensical positions that don't comport to any reality. And so it's not worth investing my time in this actual debate, because it's not a debate, it's a series of postures. What I will say, however, about this is that what it reflects to me is how Donald Trump's control of the right is entirely cosmetic. When a president has ideological and institutional bona fides, controls the debate, because we're talking about their policies. We're talking about their positions and the direction in which they want to shape the country. Donald Trump's agenda is limited to the point where we're having the kind of discussions that happen when you're the out party. The left is having the ideological, grand, schismatic ideological debates about the direction in which the country should be headed. This should be happening on the right. This should be devoted to Donald Trump's policy objectives, his 3-week, 4-week objectives over the course of whatever he wants to get done in Congress. But we're not having those debates, in part because Donald Trump has left a vacuum in his wake, and this is reflective of that vacuum.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Following up on that, Philip Klein had a piece in the Washington Examiner suggesting the point that you're effectively making, that Trumpism is limited to Trump, and that the next Republican president after Trump, there's a lot of reasons to believe that will be a return to limited government, not neo-mercantilism.
Yeah, his point is interesting in part because the debt crisis is coming. It's inevitable. It's going to be upon us. And his suggestion is that there's just simply not going to be two parties that take the same position on debt mitigation and reduction, two parties dedicated to tax increases, revenue increases, as opposed to spending cuts. It's just inevitable that one party will be for spending cuts, and that's going to be the Republican Party.
What about the idea, though, and you write about this, too. You write about it in your book because it's about social justice, injustice, and the unmaking of America. Is the Republican Party, the Congressional Republican Party, have they fully sort of internalized the size, scope, threat that the cultural Marxists on the left pose to not just the party but the country? In other words, is it going to be economic man and woman, and that's what the Republicans are going to run on? I mean, look, congressional Republicans are resistant to take on Medicare for all frontally. Just economic policy, as proposed by the establishment of Republicans, hasn't gotten the job done, and that's something that Trump tapped into in 2016.
Yeah, I just generally don't agree with the premise, frankly. First of all, I don't know of any Republican Party that has ever shied away from cultural issues. It is part of the coalition, and they absolutely litigate it and have litigated since they've been paying attention to politics. And the notion that Republicans don't combat on economic issues as though they weren't important doesn't register with me. The notion that they simply ignore Medicare for all was something that they would come to terms with somewhere down the line. I mean, I don't see that. I see them actively trying to message against it. And the economic incentives and the profit motive and the nature of markets is where I think this party should be. I think that is how you shape human nature and human interactions with one another, and that the marketplace is really the way in which you can engineer society without engaging in social engineering. And that, to me, is, I think, the best method for navigating the political environment, and which is why I think the conservative movement is the more effective, stronger movement with a better message for society, and that's generally where the Republican Party has gravitated towards in the conservative movement as opposed to its progressive alternatives. So, no, Sohrab's critique, really, of the current situation, where I'm still reluctant to get into this sort of debate, I just really don't agree with his premise. The notion here that we are in some sort of a crisis, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. And again, he is talking from the position in which the Republicans control the commanding heights of politics. They control one chamber of Congress, the presidency, and the courts, and most of the state legislatures and the governors.
Yes.
And he is talking as though he has no control over the political environment, and that's simply wacky to me.
Well, okay, but by the same token, over the last 50 years, on what issue, on what cultural issue are we advancing? One could argue life to some extent.
One could argue life.
And
could argue
what else?
Marriage. One could.
We're advancing on marriage? We just had marriage redefined out of existence.
Divorce rates are down.
Well,
marriage rates are up and divorce rates are down. Is that not a conservative objective? So now we
lost.
Saying, okay,
but
well,
we lost the
really
definition. We lost the definition of marriage. That's not a loss.
It depends on your religious perspective. So if your religious perspective is that the sanctity of marriage means that marriage exists between a man and a woman, fine. And that's Sohrab's position. Sohrab's position is that there should be a religious definition for marriage. But the existence of marriage, marriage as a union between two couples, is up. So if that's your definition, then we have a definition problem, right? So now you're suggesting that this definition is universal, and frankly, it is not. If the state of marriage, the condition in which two people create a stable home and a stable family, incentivize ownership in society, create stable communities as a result of this union, is that your objective? Then yes, things are better.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're out of time, but I mean, the left controls every cultural institution, every civic cultural institution in this country. And I mean, other than life, which, almost 5 decades in the making, maybe we're going to have this moment at the Supreme Court, and maybe John Roberts won't get wooed by the left on it. It's hard to see how government hasn't grown expansively, and the conservative positions founded in Judeo-Christian values upon which this country was built haven't receded considerably.
Sohrab is not arguing that we should have these conservative victories. The conservative victories that conservatives traditionally support are, control and limited government, and controlling the expenditures and reduced profligacy. And that's not what he's arguing for. He's arguing for a sort of profligacy and the support of the cultural conservative side. The left, by the way, is having the same argument. The left thinks they're in an existential crisis, too, that Republicans are winning everything, that they are moving the cultural needle in their direction, and that everything is going badly, and so they need to radicalize and head into the streets and start breaking things. This is the same kind of construct that they've worked themselves up into that I don't think is rooted in anything objective or empirical.
Yes, well, I understand, but they're always looking to expand their power, and we're looking to recede the power of the state, and who's winning on that score? I think the evidence suggests that it is the left almost on every metric.
Yeah, I don't agree. And I don't think there's a lot of evidence to support it. There's a lot of sentiment to support it. But no, I mean,
there's no evidence to support it.
The root of this support, there's plenty of evidence to support it. There's plenty of evidence to contradict it. One is being ignored while the other is being advanced. The root of this argument was around life, and you just simply conceded that life has been is in a better position both legally and culturally today than it was 10 years ago, and yet it constitutes crisis.
I said we'll see on life. I mean, yes, at the state level, we've seen these heartbeat bills advance in the last 6 months. That's good news, although we have a divided country. We'll see what the Supreme Court does. But thankfully, the diligence of the pro-life movement over the last 46 years, quietly, methodically, yes. K through 12 education, college education, corporate boardrooms, the arts, those are in crisis.
Well, I'm not entirely sure. You'd have to cite individual examples as to what you're referring to. But
on college campuses, I need to cite individual examples. I could cite them from now until 2020, November of 2020. I mean, you know what's happening on college campuses.
Most certainly, there are institutions that are in the capture of the left, just as there are institutions that are in the capture of the right.
You think it's
even?
It
is the objective. No, I don't think it's even. As far as cultural institutions, the left has more control over them. As far as political institutions, the right has more control over them. And this is the back and forth that's going to continue over the course of our lives, and it's going to continue when we're gone. This is the internal struggle, and it's not one that you can simply abandon by saying we need to engage in some sort of a scorched earth policy and really change the terms of engagement as though this is going to give you some sort of advantage that you don't already have. It concedes your opponent's position by adopting a caricatured idea of yourself as someone who is incapable of acting in a civilized fashion and is out to exterminate the other side. That is what the extremists on both sides of the aisle believe, and that's what animates them to get into the streets.
You don't think so?
I think it's caricature.
You don't think Amari is out to exterminate anybody, do you?
No, but that's what the kind of language that he used in his original post, that we need to stop engaging in some sort of a civil discourse in order to effect a total cultural war with no quarter. And that, to me, I think radicalizes far more than it convinces and generates more support in the opposition than it does your side.
He is Noah Rothman, associate editor for Commentary Magazine, MSNBC, NBC News contributor of the book Unjust: Social Justice and the Unmaking of America. Noah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our Turnkey Job Pro Answer Line. And coming up,